My little sister isn't a missing person anymore because somebody else came home in her place. I know I should have been ecstatic. My mother's eyes swam with gratitude, and yet mine were always cast to the ground, burning holes into crayon-ridden patches of carpet we refused to clean. We'd barely dared to dream during those silent dinners without Willow, the jarring sound of clumsy cutlery echoing through our now too empty house, conversation seeming pointless without her skipping around the dinner table, begging for the attention I gave her too little of, thumbs ghosting over my phone instead. I want to reach back in time and wrench my head from my shoulders when I think of her begging to show me a cartwheel, watching myself roll my eyes instead of grabbing her up and memorizing her face because she would be dead soon. Days of torture turned to weeks, and Willow Hartfield was gone, lost to someplace only our terrible imaginations could conjure up. She was dead, but we were ghosts, haunting our own house with pale apparitions of ourselves, eating to live and speaking only to fill the silence. She was color, and the world redrew itself in black and white for the three of us. Life was over. Until it wasn't, because Willow Hartfield, 704 days later, was found. It's what the news said, what was splashed across the national paper and beyond. It was what they uttered in incredulous tones on the podcasts, and what the mayor of our town boomed into his microphone. It's what my parents choked out in desperate, relieved sobs I'd never heard fill our house up before. It seemed I was the only naysayer staring into this girl's eyes, and knowing with every fiber of my being that this was not my Willow sitting cross-legged on our family sofa. She looked like her, eerily so, but it was off. It was wrong. Her chin a little too pointy, her gaze a little too cold. She was not my bright, bubbly little sister dressed head to toe in pink. But she said she was. She said it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes which sparkled just a shade or two off Willow's. Her voice was a semitone lower, but that's because it's been 2 years and voices change, my mother insisted. Her chin-length hair now flowed far past her shoulders in that same chocolate hue, a length Willow would gasp at if she saw. This stranger wandered straight into our house, pulled on my sister's too small clothes, and played pretend, pulling the strings on everyone but me. The first night was something out of a horror movie, the heaviest sense of dread settling like lead in my stomach. Bile rose into my throat as she skipped into the living room, settling herself in Willow's seat and tugging impatiently at the hem of my sister's favorite dress. I'd bought it for her on a spontaneous shopping trip, watching her eyes light up at all the little sunflowers lining the collar. She'd been giddy, and now a stranger's fingernails dug into the fabric, leaving marks I'd never get rid of. No longer would that little dress smell like Willow, because it was going to smell like her. "Come to the table," my mother insisted in a too jovial tone, eyes more alight than I'd seen them in years. My father nodded a silent agreement, perhaps a bit more muted than she was, and I had to swallow down my fury, my confusion. I had to. 6 eyes bore into mine, and the chair scraped as I sat down, and this wasn't my sister. She stared over her plate at me with a hollow smile, eyes devoid of any real emotion. Her fingers drummed on the mahogany, a disjointed rhythm I'd never heard despite sitting across from my sister for 9 years. "I missed you." Her words were sickly sweet, head tilted slightly to the side. Her gaze felt almost challenging, but my mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded vigorously, fork hanging in midair. "Oh gosh, you wouldn't believe..." She gulped her words down, overwhelmed. "You've dreamed of a family dinner, haven't you, love?" She regarded me almost desperately, fingers trembling. And I had, of course. I'd cried 1,000 tears for my baby sister, but the girl swinging her legs inches from mine, sitting in my sister's clothes, was not the girl I'd sobbed for. When her foot brushed mine accidentally, thousands of goosebumps erupted over my skin because it was new, wrong. "I'd love to hear where you've been." I dared whisper into the silence. My mother gasped, fork clattering noisily onto her plate. "Detective Matthews said..." "Yeah, and if Willow ever turns up, I'll keep quiet about it," I snapped, eyeing this wild animal before me. She sucked in a mighty breath, and I swore I felt her gaze prickle me. But it was only seconds before her eyes became doe-like, wide and comical. "I don't want to talk about it," she uttered sadly, looking to my mother for reassurance. Her lip quivered, hands shook. It was almost laughable how overzealous her performance was, And yet my father admonished me, snapping at me to leave, while my mother gathered up the intruder in her arms, clutching at her so she'd never leave. I watched the family before me, new and being invented before my eyes. As I left, she smirked right at me. Nobody believed me. Not on the second day when I walked in and saw her doing perfect cartwheels in the living room, something Willow had been utterly hopeless at. She must have learned my mother chirped, scrubbing dishes so vigorously I swore she was leaving cracks. Nobody blinked on the third day, when she locked herself in the bathroom and claimed to be too sick to head to the station to kickstart the rigorous medical testing. But it was the fourth night that haunted my dreams, driving me even closer to the edge I'd been dancing along. I'd largely managed to avoid her, other than the odd lingering gaze as we crossed paths in the hallway, or a wry smile as we brushed shoulders, until there she was at 2 a.m., standing over me as I slept. I didn't scream, didn't startle her into dropping her soulless smile as she gazed upon me, staring straight down mere inches from my face. So close I could feel her hot breath on my nose, feel the animosity coming off her in waves. She didn't move when I clocked her, didn't take a step back, or pretend to be doing anything other than pressing her face into mine in the dead of night. "Why are you here?" I whispered, and we both knew I meant more than standing in my room. She laughed, a little giggle I'd never heard leave Willow's mouth. "I wanted to come home, silly," she hissed back, breath tickling my cheek horribly. I swallowed, desperate not to show the fear which was beginning to course through me. "You aren't Willow," I gritted my teeth, and only then did she pull back a little, mock hurt lining her features. "That's a shame," she frowned. "You're my favorite big sister." My hands trembled under the covers. "And how many sisters have you had?" She paused then, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh, lots." I don't think I've ever felt as unsafe in my life as I did in that moment, watching her eyes glimmer with something truly evil, a sick sort of pride. I didn't find my voice for a long time, but when I did it was small and timid, a shadow of my confidence from only hours earlier. "And what do you want with us?" She thought on it for a moment, tilting her head back and forth as though the question was funny. Even in the dark she looked wrong, as though someone had built her to look like my beloved Willow, and misremembered her slightly, getting the angles and details wrong. She lay her fingers on my forehead, painfully drumming that same pattern on my skin as all those days ago. Shamefully, I was too scared to move, even as her fingers jammed into my skull. "I like your mum," she mused, giggling childishly as she caught her mistake. "Our mum. I think she's going to like me more than your sister." But before I could react, she was gone, skipping towards the door in the wrong nightclothes, only turning back to casually ruin my life. "She's dead, by the way," she murmured into the silence, shrugging. "It was painful, too. Sorry for your loss." And she left, leaving me aghast as I festered in my blanket, desperately grabbing Willow's teddy bear from beside my bed and clutching it to my chest. I sobbed myself to sleep that night, face buried in her favorite toy, and knowing for sure that she was never coming home. It only got worse. One day, I came home and my father wouldn't speak, only managing to stare at his new daughter as she smirked at him from the shadow of Willow's bedroom. He startled at me in the hallway, scurrying back into his study. When I called for him, he shook his head. "Hang out with your friends, go back outside," he'd ordered, voice cracking. He slammed the door behind him, and that was that. I was left to stare into Willow's room, locking gazes with a pair of beady eyes, sneering at me from under the bed. When I tried to speak to my mother, she grew more and more irate, once physically covering my mouth with her hand. "Mum, please see that she isn't who she—" But she muffled my words out of existence with a trembling hand, sending me a subtle no with a quick shake of the head. She pleaded towards me with her eyes, but I realized quickly that her steely gaze had fallen behind me. I didn't need to see the parasite in my peripheral to feel her gaze burning holes into the back of my head. And I wasn't imagining it. My mother was fearful, finally turning back to me with a steely resolve. "Everything is fine," she murmured, speaking 1,000 words with only her eyes and voice dropping to a whisper. "We will make it work." That night, the stranger wearing my sister's favorite bracelet gleefully pushed a piece of paper to the center of the dinner table, eyes lit up with glee. "I drew us!" she cried, greedily watching for our reactions. My mother gave nothing away, only visibly swallowing as she drank in the paper, white-knuckled grip on her spoon. My father stood from his seat, striding from the table and slamming the front door behind him as he left us, perhaps for the last time. I, however, dared pick it up, regarding every horrific line and frantic scratching before me. It was us, except the people labeled Mummy and Daddy were standing without heads, rivers of blood dripping down their torn torsos. My double sat in the corner of the paper, a pair of gouged-out eyes lying on the floor next to my terrified frame. Our stranger stood smiling, with a large rake in her hand, head bent to the side and wearing my sister's dress. But somehow, worst of all, was the picture of a little girl crumpled in the corner, a frown etched upon her face. Willow, the scrawl above her, stated, and I could hardly bear it. I don't remember much of it now, just the screaming and crying, lifting whatever wasn't nailed down and hurling it across the room, watching it splinter into 1,000 pieces. My mother cradling me as she dragged me upstairs, letting me bawl into her familiar sweet-smelling cardigan, clutching her as though she'd leave me too. The swirling wrongness engulfing our house, swallowing us back into the clutches of grief. But my all-encompassing comfort disappeared, because when that horrible little thing downstairs called a desperate mummy, my mother went rigid. "You don't have to go," I pleaded through bleary eyes, but her sad smile told me that she did. "I prayed 2 years for my baby girl to come home," she'd said in a thick voice, clutching my hands as if begging me to understand. I'll always wish I tried harder to keep her in that room with me, because the moment I loosened my grasp, I sealed her fate. The thing downstairs called, and she offered me a sad smile, fingers brushing mine before she disappeared through the darkness of the door. I never saw her again. Before my eyes closed and sleep claimed me, I saw the head of Willow's beloved bear discarded on the floor across the room, 3 feet from its body. My heart sank into my stomach and I drifted off into nightmares, feeling somehow it was all over. When I awoke, slick with sweat and dread, she was there in the darkest corner of my room. Almost Willow. Nighttime shrouded her, but I could see the blood, even in the dim light. Something glinted in her hand under the glow of moonlight, and her eyes blazed with something bigger than the both of us. It's been 12 minutes, and she hasn't moved. Her relentless, empty stare locked onto me as she sways back and forth. I know that the second I move, she's going to lunge. Somehow, I know that's what Mum did. That's why it's so quiet now, because I am utterly alone, and when I hold my breath, I think I hear the shift of fabric. Yes, she's definitely closer to me than she was 5 seconds ago. If I squint, I see her feet shuffling towards me in time with my breathing. It's over, I'm sure, but somehow every second that passes, I feel closer to my sister, the real one, not the one charging at me now, face contorted in bloody evil glee. My sister discovered a universal language, but she hasn't spoken a word since 2003. My sister is a genius. When she was about 13, she made this device that honestly still blows my mind. I've spent my entire life studying physics, and I still don't know what she did or how, which is probably for the best, considering how this all played out. I don't know how she did it, but what I do know is, in the summer of 2003, the laws governing matter and atomic mass didn't seem to affect her anymore. She was invisible to the human eye, and she was speaking a universal language we've never been able to identify or reproduce. Before I get into this, though, have you ever seen Firefly? Allow me to quote, "I am very smart. I went to the best Medicaid in Osiris, top 3% of my class, finished my internship in 8 months. Gifted is the term. So when I tell you that my little sister makes me look like an idiot child, I want you to understand my full meaning. This could have been written about me and my sisters. We come from a long line of gifted people. My father is a neurologist, my mother works for SpaceX, and my eldest sister is an artist whose work has been featured in galleries since she was 12. I'm a full-time research associate of high-energy density physics at a university I can't name without risking my career. And, like Simon Tam from Firefly before me, I don't tell you all of this to flaunt our intelligence or to make us look special. I tell you this so you can fully understand what I mean when I say Nirali made us all look like idiot children. In 2003, I was about to turn 17. My interests weren't like most teen girls. so I won't bore you with the details of what I found more entertaining than TV, books, or the mall. But more often than not, I was occupied with personal research projects. The first time Nirali made herself invisible, I was in the middle of a research rabbit hole. I was deep into some really heady academic articles when I heard Nirali pipe up behind me. "They're wrong, you know," I groaned inwardly. We'd had the knocking talk, but she was still so bad at respecting boundaries. "Nirali, what did we say about knocking?" "Oh," she said, and sounded genuinely surprised. "I didn't think about the door." "What?" I frowned and spun my chair around to look at her. My room was empty. Wait, empty? I looked around briefly before rubbing my eyes, wondering when I'd slept last and already writing the conversation off as an auditory hallucination. Shaking my head, I started to turn back to my computer when I heard her giggle. "All right, jerkhole, where are you?" "Right here," she giggled, her voice coming from directly in front of me. "What the? How? Did you hide the speakers again?" I stood up, taking a moment to really look around the room. She'd pulled a prank like this before, hiding a complex set of speakers she'd modified to create a confluence of sound she could manipulate. It would sound like someone was anywhere in the room she specified. She'd even made it sound like she was moving around. It was really impressive, especially since she'd only been 10 at the time. This time, though, she'd either gotten much better at hiding the speakers or something else was going on. She giggled again. "No speakers, just me." "Okay, just me. But how?" I folded my arms, looking in the direction of her disembodied voice. That's going to be hard to explain. That was Nirali for "you won't get it." "Try me," I said, because I'm stubborn. She did, though, and I didn't. I had the beginnings of a migraine chewing on my right eye by the time she was done. Almost none of it made sense. There was something about atomic frequencies and post-dimensional drift, superliminal desynchronization, and something she'd dubbed the Planck supratemporal parallel. It was all way over my head. "Okay," I said, rubbing my temple as I tried to digest it all. "But how did you get here?" "I walked." "Infuriating. I mean, how did you get in here?" I gestured widely to the door, which was closed, and the walls around us.
"Oh," I could hear the shrug in her voice. "I just walked where the walls were."
I squinted at the spot I thought she was standing. "You... what?" She sighed. It was a special sigh. It was the kind of sigh that told you someone much smarter than you was put out at having to dumb something down enough for you to understand. An embarrassed heat flooded my cheeks. I knew she was smarter than me, smarter than all of us, but it still made me feel like I'd failed simple math in front of Neil deGrasse Tyson and a puppy, and they were both disappointed. "I walked where the walls weren't." "The walls aren't everywhere, Divya. In fact, in most places, like realities. The walls aren't there at all, so I just walked in those places." I wanted to see the proofs of this statement, though I knew she wouldn't have bothered writing them down except in scraps and incomplete snippets that only made sense to her. I also knew the proofs wouldn't make any more sense than her original explanation. Even so, it bothered me that I only understood what she meant in the vaguest, most conceptual way. It wasn't natural for me. That abstractness of thought warred with the linear way of my brain, making actual understanding impossible, and I hated it. Sana would have understood. Her brain worked that way, but not mine. I must have looked like I was struggling with it, and I was, because she continued on. "Where I am, or technically when and how, everything is a Schrödinger's puzzle of is and isn't. All I have to do is observe the places where the state of something isn't and go there." This wasn't helping. I mean, I got the basic concept of what she was saying, but in terms of the practical application of physics, it was a mess of meaningless sciencey buzzwords. Nothing she said had any foundation in known science. She could have told me I ate ice cream upside down and chanted purple backwards 30 times, and the wall turned to jello, but only as long as I looked at it from a 45-degree angle. And it would have been exactly as scientifically sound as what she'd actually said. Yet she was the one who was invisible, so the limits of my understanding and science itself had no bearing on her corporeal existence. "Do you still have a body? I mean, can you see you?" "Oh yeah," she said, her voice pitched higher in excitement. "I look like 100 versions of me laid on top of each other. Looking at my hands and stuff is kind of trippy, but I'm here. Cool. I had no idea what to do with this information. She started giggling again. What now? I can't believe you haven't noticed yet. Noticed what? I couldn't keep the flash of irritation out of my voice. It wasn't easy to accept the premise that she'd managed to trick physics into letting her pass through matter while being imperceptible to the human eye, but I'd had just about all the how much dumber than Nirali are you I could take for one day. What language am I speaking? I had to blink at that and think a moment. It's English, isn't it? She giggled again. Say something, I ordered in my most authoritative big sister voice. Nor again is there anyone who loves or pursues or desires to obtain pain of itself, because it is pain, but because occasionally circumstances occur in which toil and pain can procure him some great pleasure. If I concentrated, I could tell the words she was saying didn't quite match what I was apparently translating in my head, but I couldn't hear them for what they were. Except, wait, is that the lorem ipsum translation from De Finibus Bonorum et Malorum? She giggled again. Yep, want me to try something in Hindi? Yeah, I said, a little stunned and more than a little curious. Go for it. May he, in whose lap shines forth the daughter of the mountain king, who carries the celestial stream on his head, on whose brow rests the crescent moon, whose throat holds poison, and whose breast is support of a huge serpent, and who is adorned by the ashes on his body, may that chief of gods, the lord of all, the destroyer of the universe, the omnipresent Shiva, the moon-like Sankara, ever protect me. I frowned, torn between focusing on the words and trying to identify what she was quoting. I started mouthing some of the words as my mind ran back over them, and gawped a little as recognition settled in. Did you just quote the Ramcharitmanas Ayodhya Kand invocation? Another giggle. But how? That didn't sound like Hindi at all. Fascinating, she said. It didn't feel like Hindi when I said it, but I was thinking the Hindi words. What did it sound like to you? English, I guess. I mean, it didn't sound like anything, but I understood you in English. That's so cool. Can you actually hear something other than English? Kinda. I mean, almost. If I try, I can tell the sounds you're making don't match the meaning of the words I'm not hearing, but understanding. But the meaning overrides everything else, so I can't actually identify individual sounds or phrases. Do you think you could identify the physical linguistics if we went word by word? It may be the processing of complete phrases prevents the identification of individual phonemes. Maybe, I said, shrugging, still trapped in awe of this aspect of her discovery. We could try it. She had me run her through some general object identification to give me a chance to listen for the sounds she was making and how they differed from the words I knew, the words I was hearing, but I only ever caught the ghosts of divergent beginnings and ends. She thought this was hilarious. I thought it was magical. She started making regular trips to my room in this state, usually after lights out or when our parents were at work. I didn't blame her for sneaking. Sana wasn't into the science stuff, and if our parents knew what we'd been up to, we'd have been grounded for life, especially since Nirali had already been banned from experimental projects at home. The last one had required a lot of external help, and several $1,000s to clean up, but someone had to try and catalogue this universal lexicon, and this was the only way we had access to it. One night, as we lay awake on the floor naming objects, we'd tried making individual sounds before, but without the intent of meaning behind them, there was no divergence. Nirali froze. I couldn't see her, of course, but something changed. She stilled to the point I worried she'd maybe phased through the floor or something and left me alone. But somehow I still felt her presence, along with something sharp and alien I couldn't identify. Nirali? I whispered, cold unease settling on me like snow. Shh! It was her, but so quiet I almost missed it. I felt the urgency behind it, though, and hushed to wait in the silence with her. As the seconds ticked by, a prickling dread crawled across the room. It started at the edges, where the shadows were thickest and spread outward, tainting everything it touched, including me. My pulse quickened as a primal paranoia sank in. I knew it was just Nirali and me, but it felt like a predator was stalking the shadows, searching for us, and it was only our silence that kept it from pouncing. To keep the paranoia at bay, I focused on the warm red readout of the clock above my desk. The slowly changing numbers were soothing and hypnotic. They dulled the edges of my fear until, at some point between midnight and 2 a.m., I fell asleep. I only realized this when Nirali finally whispered my name, pulling me back to reality. "Divya, wake up!" "Hmm?" I swam back to consciousness slowly, shaking off the half-formed discomfort of a dream I couldn't remember. "It's gone now." "What's gone?" I rubbed the sleep still clogging my vision and blinked at the clock above my desk. So late. Had we really been laying on the floor for 2 hours? Nirali didn't answer, not for a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd dreamed her waking me up entirely. "The shadow behind the walls," she whispered, cutting the silence away like cobwebs. There was a weight to her words I couldn't describe that tickled the primal centers of my brain again. An ancient urge calling to me, telling me to hide. "The... what?" I croaked, propping myself up on my elbows, but Nirali was gone. Not just quiet. There was a difference in the room when she left, and I could always sense it, even if she didn't say she was going. A few minutes later, she was at my bedroom door, actually knocking. The sound startled me, giving my heart a sudden workout with a spike of adrenaline. I snuck over to the door to let her in, too keenly aware of the night around me, and jumping at shadows I suddenly worried couldn't be trusted. Without a word, she slipped past me and crawled into bed, hiding beneath the covers, with her knees against the wall and her back to me. I took my cue as it was offered and crawled in behind her, offering myself as protection against the night. Sleep was slow in coming as my body flushed the survival instinct from its veins. But eventually it must have come as the next thing I knew the sun was peeking through the windows and Nirali was watching me sleep. "Divya?" Nirali said my name like she was testing it, as if she didn't expect to hear it again. "Yeah?" "Nothing," she said, curling back under the covers before adding, "Thanks." It was a week before she came to me through the walls again. "I think it's drawn to the language," she said, pulling me out of a dream about superfluid. "What is?" I yawned, oddly comfortable with the resumption of our nightly conversations. "The shadow behind the walls. What is that?" "I don't know. Something big, something old, older than time maybe." "What's with the Sana talk? Older than time?" "I don't know, Divya. That's just what it feels like." She was always like this, caught somewhere between science and emotion, like the perfect cross between me and Sana. I think it allowed her to think abstractly enough to escape the box of the known to innovate, while remaining linear enough to build a new box to house her innovations. But sometimes it meant she didn't have the math to back it up. Sometimes it was just a feeling or the hint of a notion. But even then, Nirali's feelings were always spot on, even if it took science a few decades to prove it. "All right," I said, accepting that answer. It was odd, I realized then, how a few weeks of exposure to what my mind told me was factually impossible opened me to the flexibility of the possible. I was surprised too when I noticed my first instinct wasn't to challenge her or demand proof just because what she said was beyond my experience or immediate comprehension. Instead, I would nod and accept that what she said, what she experienced, was simply truth, and the limitations of my understanding couldn't change that. "What does it want?" "I don't know. I don't think it talks, but I think it listens and understands." "That's unsettling," I said, shifting under the covers. The superstitious child in me made sure my feet were hidden in the center of the bed because the shadows still couldn't be trusted. She hummed her agreement. It's not the only thing here, though. A chill surged through me, prompting my heart into a panicked gallop. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are other things, big things, old things. Most of them can't see me, I think. I'm not really where they are, same as I'm not really where you are, but they can hear me, same as you." "Are you safe?" Nirali was silent. My stomach churned, because I knew it meant something big and old and dangerous was near enough to pose a threat. After several minutes passed, she answered, "Sometimes, only sometimes." I sat up, staring at the spot on the floor where she would have been seated. "Only sometimes. Then why are we still doing this, Nirali? I wouldn't have agreed if I knew you were in danger." "I know," she said quietly, "but there's so much here." If I focus on a color, I can experience everything that color has ever been and ever will be. If I think about a time, I'm sitting in what used to be here, or sometimes what will be here, watching a blur of activity that won't happen for another 1,000 years. I've seen cities you can't even begin to imagine made of glittering bone and glass. Monolithic wonders to shame the gods. Last night, I was standing in the center of a black hole, not a hologram or a simulation, but an actual black hole. Captured, contained, reproduced, harnessed, I don't know what, but it was here, and so was I, and through the black hole, I saw so many other universes, all laid out like mirrors into infinity. Nirali, I whispered, both awed and terrified. Had she been experiencing these things every night? All the hours we talked about nothing and nonsense. But there are also bigger things, she said, her voice dipping into darkness. Things that hide in the glint of starlight on glass. Things that follow me back from the future and wait for me in the past. They skip like stones on water, only touching the surface for a minute, and never with their whole selves. But even that much is too much. It hurts to look at them. There are too many shapes at once, and all of them are hungry in ways I don't understand. Tears welled in my eyes as I listened to her. It hurt to accept these things as truth. I couldn't understand them or touch them or even experience them myself, but I had to accept they were real, because my sister was invisible. She could pass through matter at will and spoke a universal language to me every night. But accepting all that also meant accepting that my sister spent every night compelled by her own curiosity to go back to this dangerous state again and again, only to be terrified by what waited in between. I'm glad they can't see me, but I don't think that will be true much longer. What? Why? The shadow behind the walls has been in my room all week. I can feel it following me around. It's listening now, but I don't think it will come in your room again. Nene, you have to stop this. I can't, she said, her voice thick with imminent tears. Of course you can. Just come back and we'll destroy whatever you've been using to shift. We can fix this. No, she said, the word wet and bent beneath an anguish no 13-year-old should have known. You don't understand. What could possibly be worth the risk? My heart broke in the silence that stretched between us. An eternity of pain and longing swirled between us, and one final fragile breath spoke of the tears she held back when she found her voice again. I can't speak English anymore. I didn't understand. Like the first time she described the math to me, this statement defied understanding. What do you mean you can't speak English anymore? I mean I can't speak anything but this stupid between language, Divya. I tried and tried all week, but all that comes out now is this ugly mess of gurgles and scrapes and noises I don't recognize, and I'm so scared. I'm so scared because they can still hear me when I'm out there with you, and out there I'm not invisible, and you and Sana and Mom and Dad aren't invisible, and none of us are safe when I'm out there, and the only time I can talk right is when I'm in here, she sobbed. When I'm here with you. My heart turned somersaults in my stomach. I let this happen. I should have stopped her the day she showed me her stupid science-shattering trick. Nene, I whispered, and all I wanted to do was hold her until everything was right. You have to come back. I don't know what we'll do to fix this, but you can't stay there. I know, she said through a heavy veil of tears. I just didn't want to lose you, to lose us. You still have me, but I won't out there, not like this. I didn't have a good answer for her. We'll find a way to fix it, was all I could say, and we both knew it wasn't enough. We also knew that it had to be, because we didn't have a choice. I felt her presence fade, and a few minutes later there was a quiet knock at my door. Nirali stood on the other side, shaking as silent sobs racked her narrow frame. I gathered her up, shutting the door behind her, and together we curled around each other on the floor and cried. We cried until we passed out from exhaustion, and woke up long after the sun had risen. I woke to Nirali watching me again, and blinked away the haze of tear-stained sleep. Nirali? She nodded, mute, a sadness hanging over her shoulders. Can you... She shook her head. Nothing. She glanced up, looking over me and toward the hall as someone passed by. I could tell a million thoughts were flitting through her head in that moment, most of them conflicting. But after a minute or so, a stony resolution had settled in her eyes, and she scooted closer, waving for me to do the same. Her mouth was almost against my ear when something unimaginably foul rattled from her lips. A shudder of revulsion rocked through me at the sound of each mangled phoneme. I've never been so disgusted and terrified in my life. I could hear her voice, but it was dripping with caustic venom, dragging over hot coals, buried in the deepest ocean, and clawing at the edges of sanity with angry talons. It was wrong, and to this day it was the most vile, viscerally upsetting experience of my life. The words, this language, was never meant to be spoken by man. Science won't support me, but I know in my bones these words have power man wasn't meant to use. And yet, despite my mind rebelling from the mere sound of her voice, warped around these hideous words, I still knew what she'd meant, as if she'd said it in English. Don't tell Mum and Dad. There's someone pretending to be my sister downstairs in my house. It has her voice, but I don't think it's really her. "Bye, Eddie," my mother calls up to me from downstairs. I take my rightmost headphone off my ear, and I pick up the sound of the general bustle in the downstairs hallway. I can hear my dad and my sister laughing to each other as coats are taken from the rack. "Bye," I call back, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. The game goes on. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" My mom calls up. "It could be fun. Fun family outing." I roll my eyes. "I'm good, Mom, bye." My sister calls up too. "Come on, Eddie, don't sit around in the house like a loser all day." "Goodbye," I shout down again. "All right, see you soon," my mom replies. "Later, loser," Louise calls, though it's good-natured, really. We do get on. I can hear Mom gently chiding her, though I can't make out the words. I sure do recognize that tone, though. Their voices fade out, and the footsteps soften. The front door is drawn closed. I hear the sound of my mom locking the door up behind her. Awesome. Some peace, at last. Don't have to worry about anyone barging in and interrupting. I return my headphone to my ear and reinvest my full attention to the matter at hand. Securing a victory. Got to keep my current ranking. A second loss in a row and my score will tank. Can't afford that right now. Click, click, click. I tap away at the keys. Explosions rattle in my ears as I navigate the environment. Fully engrossed, muscle tensed as I do my best, at last bringing the round to a close. I clap my hands in victory and lean back, the chair squeaking as I do so. I slide off my headphones and take a moment to revel in the victory, listening to the soft patter of the rain against the window. The day is grey and overcast. Wind sighs gently in the trees on the street outside. I glance at the clock. Damn, it's been almost an hour already. How time flies. I spin around in my chair, drumming my fingers against the desk. I catch a quick reflection of myself in the screen as it loads. Sat at my computer, just like you probably are right now. Or maybe you're on your phone. Same difference. Connected, engaged, and yet for now, alone. The rain patters, and the game freezes. The loading circle becomes stuck mid-turn. I try to shake the mouse, but that too has become frozen. Fuck's sake, I mutter, tapping the S key. Nothing. It says I'm going for Ctrl+, Alt+, Delete that I hear a noise from downstairs. Sounded like a cupboard door being shut. Instantly, I find myself suppressing a wave of panic. It's fascinating, really, how quickly one's level of alertness can change. All my senses are primed and I become hyper-aware of the sound of my breathing, of the beating of my heart. Maybe it was imagination, maybe the sound was something else. Did it come from outside? But as I listen, it comes again. Another cupboard, and then what sounds like the fridge. It's okay, don't panic, don't panic. Serial killers don't go looking through cupboards and fridges, do they? I creep to my door and slowly, gently, steadily ease it open, slipping out into the corridor and tiptoeing to the banisters of the stairs, listening out for some more clues. I hold my breath and then, as I hear water start flowing into the sink, I allow myself to relax a little. Killers don't wash their hands before a murder. What would be the point? I'm summoning the courage to call down when I hear a voice call up first. All my tensions are relaxed at once, as the voice is my sister's. "Hi, Eddie. I've got some food for you down here." I call back, "Oh, great. Did you stop at the cookie place on your way back? Please tell me you got the caramel ones." There is a pause. "Come down and see," she replies, as I hear stuff being moved about on the counter. "All right, give me a sec," I shout down, heading back into my room to force restart my computer. I take another look at the clock. I think to myself, they haven't been out very long. I wonder why they came back. Maybe the rain. I press and hold down the power button, then return through my door to the top of the stairs. "How come you guys are back so early?" I call out. There is no response. The door to my parents' room is open. I glance through it to see the rain wash gently down the window at the room's far side. For some reason unknown to me at this stage, unease creeps quietly into the back of my head. "Louise," I call down, still hesitating by the banisters, "where's Mom and Dad?" There is another silence. I walk the length of the hallway, passing by a little window to the street outside. My parents' car, it would seem, has not returned. I continue on until I'm stood at the top of the stairs, looking down them and into the hall below. The lights are all still switched off, and an unsettling aura seeps up the steps from the shadows beneath. "Come on down, Eddie," comes my sister's voice from somewhere unseen. "The kitchen, I think. Come see what I have for you." I cannot hear the sound of cupboards now. There is no rustling, no movement of any objects or bags or jingling of keys. My sister finishes speaking, and then there is silence. Silence, and the gentle patter of the rain. My hands, I realize, are sweating. What the hell is this? I think to myself. Eddie, come on, man, just pull yourself together. But something compels me to remain where I stand. Some unseen force keeps me from taking a step down onto the stairs and descending to the bottom floor. "Louise," I try to call back, but my voice fails me. It does not project the way I intended. I clear my throat, though my mouth has dried. The sensation is an uncomfortable one. "Eddie," comes the reply. "Eddie, come downstairs." "When did you get back?" I manage to call down. "Where's the car?" Silence. "Louise," I call down again, unsure of what else to say. And then, a moment later, from around the corner, my sister walks slowly and deliberately into view. She stops at the bottom of the stairs, still shrouded in shadow, and she looks up to me. We hold each other's gaze for a moment, her at the base of the steps and I at the top. She does not speak, and her expression shifts to a wide grin. Her teeth appear very white in the darkness. She makes a quick motion with one of her hands. "Follow," is the implication, and then she turns and walks slowly back to the kitchen, out of sight. It is not until I cannot see her that her voice comes again. "Come on, Eddie. Come and see what I have to show you." The hairs on the back of my neck all raise in cold alarm. I do not follow. With my jaw clenched and blood frozen in my veins, I make a hasty retreat to my room where I close the door shut, perhaps just a little too quickly. The thud of the door going into its frame reverberates around the walls. Less than 1 second later, in that exact same instant, I hear the unmistakable sound of something barreling up the stairs, knocking carelessly into the banisters with rapid, ascending creaks and clamoring. I cry out loud in terror, and with a surge of adrenaline, I grab hold of my chest of drawers. I haul it across the floor into place, blocking the door. My potted plant falls and lands with a dull thump by my feet, soil spilling out across the carpet. My heart hammers in my chest as I stare at the door, tensed and waiting for the handle to start rattling, waiting for something to throw itself against the door from the opposite side. My sister. But none of those things happen. The minutes tick by excruciatingly slowly. The sounds of the sudden race up the stairs ended as quickly as they began, and with the utmost caution, I tentatively press my ear against the wood, listening, breathing deep, straining to hear for any sign or clue as to what the fuck is going on. "Open the door, Eddie," my sister's voice whispers from the other side. I leap back from the door in horror, fumbling around on my desk for my phone, too afraid to look away. I grab it and tap in the passcode, my shaking fingers failing the password the first time. And the second, the thing on the other side of the door does not knock. It does not try to force its way in. It only repeats itself. "No. Eddie, stop screwing around. Open the door and let me in. I have something to show you." I try to call my mum first. I bring the phone up to my ear, shaking. The line is engaged. Fuck. "Come on, Eddie, open the door. I want to show you something." "Louise," I reply at last, my voice trembling. "You're freaking me the fuck out. If this is a prank, just stop, okay? Just stop." "Open the door, Eddie. Open up and let me in. You need to see this. Please, come with me." "Please, if it's a prank, I forgive you. Just stop messing with me." Silence. and then, just come downstairs. You need to come downstairs with me. Just follow. Screw this. Next up, I call the police. An overreaction perhaps, but better safe than sorry. The tone sounds through the phone. There's a click, then 911, what's your emergency? I take a deep breath. Hello, 911 comes through the phone. There's an intruder in my house. I whisper at last, as quietly as I can. Though evidently my sister hears. Her voice has risen in pitch. I don't think she likes this development. Eddie, you need to open the door. Let me in. You need to open the door. You need to open the door. Let me in. This is really important. Really important. Something about the way she says those final words sets my teeth on edge. It wasn't slurred as such. It just, I don't know how to describe it. As if the muscles for her speech, I guess, were getting tired. But despite my fear, I do my best to ignore her, and I provide my details to the person on the line. The rain starts hammering down against the glass, and the wind picks up too. Okay, sir, they say after I have told them my location. A car will be with you shortly. Please, stay on the line. I do so, keeping as far away from my bedroom door as I can, terrified that at any moment the person with my sister's voice is going to barge through. Eddie, she shouts, making me jump. Eddie, you need to let me in. You need to come with me. I swear that I hear a car drive past outside, and I turn to look through the rain-washed window. And as I do so, my heart nearly stops in my chest. Down there at the side of the road, standing in the rain and looking up into my window, right at me, is my family, my mom, my dad, and Louise, just standing in a line, hands by their sides, staring up at me, staring up into my window. And they are all smiling, all grinning that same chilling grin, looking up at me, unblinking. The police arrived about 10 minutes after that, and they had a hell of a time calming me down. I never heard my sister leave from behind the doorway, though the officers didn't find anyone, even after a thorough search of the house. My family outside vanished after I briefly turned away. 1 minute they were there, and the next, gone. My mother, my real mother, God hopes, nearly had a panic attack of her own when she came home to find cop cars parked up outside. Louise had no idea what the hell I was talking about. None of them did, and she insisted she wasn't playing any kind of prank. She can be annoying at times, but still, I really can't see her doing anything like this. I can't see any of them doing something like this. I had to wait to see their mouths move in time to their speech before I could even begin to let my guard down also. It's been about a month since this incident. I have a lock on my door now, and I haven't seen or heard anything quite so terrifying since. But I still get angsty at night, and hell, who wouldn't? And I tell you what else too, when my family are heading out and they ask if I want to go along. These days, I say yes. My sister is an anomaly. An anomaly is defined as anything that deviates from the expected, normal, or standard. This is quite a wide definition. An ant being slightly stronger than most others of its species is an anomaly. But so is something that breaks our perception of reality, something that goes against everything we've ever known, bringing the nature of existence into question, is an anomaly, something to be studied. When it gets swept away, unexplained, however much the anomaly has affected your life, you begin to feel a lot like that ant. Insignificant. My sister is an anomaly now. It started with a simple complaint about her hand feeling strange, a tingling sensation. The doctors almost flat out refused to do anything. I want to be angry, but then I remember telling her my own thoughts. It's nothing. Everyone gets weird feelings. It'll pass. It's what everyone told her. I suppose we thought we were reassuring her. Then the next symptom began. We awoke to her screaming over and over. My hand is drooping, my hand is drooping. Without any context, what does that even mean? She knew exactly what it meant. She was the only one living this nightmare. Nobody could quite understand what she felt. I burst into her room seconds before our parents did the same. There she knelt, on her bed, with the fingers of her right hand about twice as long as usual. I can feel them, she cried. They're trying to continue. My mother flicked the switch, perhaps hoping that our eyes deceived us in the dark. The middle of the night, in a very dim light. It seems to teeter right on the edge of reality. It's the perfect condition to conjure up an illusion of the mind, yet this, right here, was as real as you. Her hand was stretched. My mother immediately dialed the emergency services, whilst my father went into comfort mode. Hey, it's all right. Are you feeling okay? My sister sat for a moment, staring at her hand. Her breathing remained constantly heavy. In the background, I could hear my mother on the phone, although I wasn't paying much attention. Yes, twice as long. She was asleep. No, I don't know how. I feel... She paused, perhaps focusing on the feeling, deciding whether or not she felt okay. How would she even describe okay in this moment? Long.
No.
My father and I glanced at each other for a moment. Was that meant to be a joke? I smiled awkwardly. What does that mean? She got up from her bed, making it slowly apparent to all of us that she was taller. Not by much. Maybe an inch or two. But in the context of human height overnight, that's a lot. The room fell silent. I think I could make out the operator on the other side of the phone, trying to see if my mother was still there. Physically, she was, but mentally, I think she was just worried for her daughter. What's happening to me? Her voice broke slightly. It broke all of us along with it. To sound so dazed and lost about your own self is heartbreaking. It was the last time I saw her with any description of human emotion. She lunged towards my mother in the doorway, not to hurt her, just to leave the room. Although, with all the urgency she had in her movement, I don't believe she would have cared if she had hurt anybody on the way out.
No.
We all called out for her, but she didn't turn back around. She didn't speak. She just ran through the house.
No.
Leaving the light of her room, she blended into the shadows. I don't know if my mind deceived me, but I swear I saw her hit her head on the ceiling multiple times, as if she was growing further. Each time she did, she grunted with pain, as if using a voice that was not her own. Each of us only seeing her from the corner of our eyes had managed to lose her in our own home. My father searched around upstairs whilst my mother, still on the phone, started wandering the street outside. Catching a glimpse of something out the back window of the kitchen, I stepped outside. I was afraid of what I might be walking into. What nightmare could be waiting for me? I decided that whatever it was, I owe it to my sister to join her in this. Slowly, I made my way towards the movement. She had wrapped herself around a tree in the garden, one we used to climb as kids. She spoke something that I could only just make out over the sound of my own heart pounding. Everything is long. Her voice, raspy and weak, frightened me. Her black hair, usually down to her shoulders, now found its way down to the floor. I couldn't see her fully in the night, but the moonlight allowed me to see her vague shape. She was elongated, more so than before. My voice shook as I spoke, trying to calm her. We'll fix this. I held out my hand. For a moment I thought she might hold out her own. Maybe she would have if the sirens weren't so loud. An ambulance at the front of the house caught her attention as she let go of the tree, her snake-like limbs falling to the ground as she made her way over the fence. They never caught her. We never found her. Her funeral was held a month later. It's been 3 years. I still live in the same home. Her bedroom is almost exactly as it was. We keep her door open. Sometimes as I walk past, I imagine her sat in her bed. Her body is back to its regular self. I'm okay now, she'll say. You helped me. But it's a mirage. A trick of the mind. My sister as herself is no longer real. Is she still out there, stretched? I got my answer last night. Unable to sleep, I slowly became acutely aware of a tapping noise. I don't know how long it had been going before my mind allowed it to be perceived. Seconds, minutes, hours. I suppose it doesn't matter. Once I had heard it, it stayed. 5 taps, rhythmically pattering against my window, behind the curtain. Sick of the noise, I got up, ready to see tree branches blowing in the wind. Instead, I saw 5 long fingers extending from below my vision. The palm of the hand seemed just on the edge of what I could see. A face, beginning halfway up the window and continuing far below, looked in at me. The eyes were long, with the open mouth being even longer. This was unmistakably my sister's face. Whether or not it's my sister is another question. I stood there for a moment, recoiling but not making a sound. Her appearance is not what scared me the most. My hand began to tingle. Thank you for dropping by the archives and listening to our ghastly stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and lastly subscribe. Until next time, archivists, I bid you all good night.